Hello, world, and welcome back to the Depression Vacation Podcast.
World.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's been a busy week for us, and it's going to be many busy weeks to come. And we brought back a special guest who was our first special guest. You always remember your first.
Yeah.
And he's our first, so.
I think, yeah.
I am honored. It's a
Wallace,
real honor
everybody.
to be the first.
Surprise!
We say that like you haven't already seen his beautiful headshot on the promo materials for this particular pot, similar to Liz last week. But yeah, Wallace is here to talk about creativity and creativity and create some creativity in the land of creativeness.
Yeah. Well, we're all creative, right? Like whether you're doing stand-up comedy or improv or, you know.
Speaking of stand-up comedy, I guess I should have waited until the very end to ask this when we plug our things. But Shannon, did you sign up for the stand-up competition?
I did not, because one of the rounds is the weekend of the Addams Family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so unfortunately I won't be participating, but I'm excited to see some of my friends getting on there.
Yeah. I actually got the very last spot.
Okay.
And I sort of panicked because I meant to sign up, and then I saw Glessner post something about like, oh, there's one more spot left. I'm like, no. And then I'm actually, this is a bad week for me too for that, because I'm actually on vacation the entire week that all of the rounds are happening. And I happen to just be coming home the night that I'm doing it, which is the last night I could have participated. So I got in lucky. So.
Yeah, that'll be a fun event being hosted by the Comedy Zone. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we had our last shit in the hat this last week.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to make it. It was my birthday, so.
Yeah, I was gonna I went out for just a little bit, but I didn't stay or make my presence known to people for very long. I kind of just popped in to see people because I hadn't been for a while, and then I got tired and went home. So, story of my life. But shit in a hat, I forget, did Liz talk about
what is shit in a hat?
Oh, that is a good question.
Yeah, we should explain. Well, I mean, it's over now and is probably, I imagine that it might be resurrected at some point. So, do you want to take this, Shannon? Yeah,
so it was kind of a little showcase of, I'd say, about 10 comedians or so. What would happen is everybody would show up in the audience, and the comedians would submit different topics literally into a hat. And so you'd have X amount of time it's an improv stream. You pull out a topic and you make jokes about whatever topic you pulled.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, it was such a fun concept. And I only got to do it one time, but I went to 3 other shit in the hats, and I always had a really good time with it. But I forget if Liz said this on the podcast or when I was picking her up, but she had said something like the level of quality for the show had gone downhill a bit, and that's kind of why they were discontinuing it. But you know,
was it a good ending?
I don't know. I wasn't there.
From what I saw, it was okay. It was nice. I saw Liz. I didn't really publicize myself. I stood in the back for just a little bit because I really wanted to go home early. So I made an appearance. I saw some of the last ever shit in a hat, and then I went home. So yeah. We'll
miss you, shit in a hat. Maybe you'll come back to us in the future.
I would be willing to bet it comes back in the future.
They say if you love something, let it go.
I would toss out there maybe piss on a puppy.
Piss on a pup. No. We don't talk about dogs that way. Get out!
Wallace all of a sudden became not a friend with the podcast.
Fart at a funeral?
We're moving in the right direction, but still.
Laughter at a funeral, that's my specialty. I love making jokes at funerals. It's my favorite thing. I've talked about this on the podcast before, how I want to market myself to people to put in their funeral plan, and you can pay me to roast you at your funeral. I think that would be the greatest thing. And especially if you're being cremated, then it'd be a double roast.
You've been creamed.
He's just been shanned.
Damn it, Wallace.
That's kind of so I was actually talking with some people at work recently because at this point, this is an unusual VidJam year because we had the collaborative and we're I guess halfway through now because there's 2 more left. And I was talking to people I'd worked with on there, and I was like, for film in the future, I might actually like more doing just sketches instead of full-blown films in the future, because they're pretty easy to shoot. You're generally in one location for them, and they only take a couple of hours. And I think that it's a fun way. Like I've been watching a really disproportionate amount of I Think You Should Leave with Tim Robinson lately, and like all those sketches I love, and I think they're brilliant because they go to places I wouldn't have expected them to. But I also was kind of like, I feel like we could do this. Like these are all like things that we could, like, especially as improvisers, we know how to heighten things and find the unusual thing. And so if we just wrote a sketch situation, I think we could find something funny. And the funeral jokester is something I think could be a funny sketch.
Oh, that would be a funny sketch.
Yeah. I mean, not to get too dark on this, but it reminds me a little bit of my dad's impromptu funeral, where he had he had one of his drinking buddies there. It was weird. It was we're not Jewish, but the individual who was like the chaplain at the hospice who officiated, it was an outdoor funeral at a state park where my dad used to work, on the shoreline of the bay in Delaware, in Lewis. And the person officiating it was actually Jewish. They were not, Christian, but because they knew my dad well and they'd been at hospice with him in his last few months, she was the one that we ended up kind of hiring to do the funeral. And then the attendees, it was only like 7 or 8 people total. Most of them were like salt of the earth types. So they were just cracking jokes at this situation, the fact that we were dumping my dad's ashes into the bay. And the ultimate cosmic joke of the whole thing, I don't know if any of you have ever spread ashes, but
I haven't,
was it a
but I've seen
Lebowski
videos.
situation?
Don't spoil my ending, Hal.
Oh, sorry. Hal, stop spoiling things.
Ashes, when you spread them, like when you see it depicted on TV, it just seems like such a wonderful, a beautiful moment. You're letting go. Well, we happened to let go as the tide was going out. And so I upturned the plastic baggie with my dad's ashes.
And it just went
into the water, and it just kind of went plump in a big mound.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
And because the water was going out, my dad just stuck around there for a while.
Oh. That's not a Lebowski. That's its own separate thing. Kind of.
No, I saw that coming because like ashes are, when they're in a clump like that in an urn or in a bag or whatever, they're like more dense than people think they are. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like dust where it just kind of flows, like catches the wind, and it's like, Pocahontas or something where it's like rising up above the trees like that. I don't know what people think happens to these ashes, because I think about this all the time.
You think about this all the time?
Constantly. Like, it keeps me up at night, because I'm wondering, like...
And you're clicking your fingernails right now because it's making you nervous.
It gives me anxiety, because, like, how many humans' particles have I ingested in my lifetime? Because, they're just in the air and wherever.
I think that's kind of beautiful.
Every time you go to Disney, like, you're inhaling someone.
Yeah. Well, every time you're anywhere... Like, you are literally, the past is a part of you, and eventually you will become a part of someone else.
Frank Turner actually, he has a line in one of his songs about that where he once says, oh man, I wish I could think of the lyrics on the top of my head, but something like, I'll have 7 million particles of me be ingested by 7 million souls and live along with 7 million people. And it's kind of sweet, I thought, in that context, although you make it sound like it's more horrifying.
It's a little horrifying. I'm just shocked that you guys are so calm right now.
You know what that kind of reminded me of too? Did you ever see Years and Years? Anybody? It was this fantastic, it was almost like a Black Mirror adjacent show that Russell T Davies did the year before the pandemic, that follows a British family living through what are essentially the end times politically, but most of it is stuff that actually happened. Because, sweet summer child, 2019 was a different time. But one of the main characters is trying to smuggle his boyfriend into England many times because he's a Ukrainian export, and they can't get him in because in this dystopia, English immigration law is almost impossible. And they both pass away, or he passes away while they're trying to get him into the country. over the English Channel. And like a year later, they're going to spread his ashes, but it's pouring rain. And their grandmother is like crying and refuses to do it because she says he's just going to become mud. So they have to put it off. And I'm like, that was such a sad moment, like, but also probably true.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I don't know why this made me think of it. You ever seen Mouse Hunt?
Oh, yeah, many times.
I was just thinking of that scene. That's one of my favorite scenes. I showed that to an old boss of mine once. I was like, you've never seen Mouse Hunt? You have to see this.
It's like maybe one of the best physical comedy. And like, have you ever seen Mouse Hunt, Wallace?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember. I watched it.
We are all on the same page
I
about
watched it
Mouse
in
Hunt.
like elementary school.
Yeah, that's about when it came out. Like, and I think the greatest like inside joke of Mouse Hunt is that it is every single gag is like a giant Rube Goldberg device, much like the beloved game Mouse Trap. So,
oh yeah, it's kind of got like a Home Alone vibe, but with a mouse.
Yeah. It might have been the first Nathan Lane movie I ever saw, actually, was Mouse Hunt.
I freaking love Nathan Lane, man.
Me too.
Love him so much.
But not to continue to squeeze you out, but I love the idea that it's kind of its own form of immortality, if you think about it.
Yes, breathing other people
the
in
component
and then being
parts
stuck with you.
of ourselves live on forever. They live on past us.
It's interesting you bring this up because actually I was talking with my friend Steve Okawa, who's the poet who wrote a lot of the poetry that's going to be used in my collaborative movie. Steve, as I think I've mentioned before, has chronic fatigue syndrome, so hasn't left his house for years at this point. And he goes through good and bad spells, but he has had a good spell lately where I've been talking with him more. And we were talking about the concept of immortality, and he was saying very specifically he can't wait to be forgotten. Like, he's so happy that when he passes away, like a few people will remember him, and then within a few decades, it'll be like he never existed, because he says immortality is too much pressure. And the fact that he said that reminded me too, like having grown up in super religious households, obviously the concept of hell, being tortured forever, like scared the living shit out of me every time I would think about it. But like an underrated thing that scared me was actually thinking about heaven too, because it was still like a frightening concept that you would live on forever and there was no end to your existence whatsoever.
I have that fear as well, but simultaneously I have the fear of not existing. So that's a fun way to live.
It's a catch-22.
Yeah.
I know, yeah.
So I don't know if I ever asked you, were you raised mostly atheist or?
So that's complicated. So from the ages of about 6 to 13, Christianity played a part. My mom's parents were Christians. We went to church. It was very much a part of our lives. But during that time, my mom was instilling in us this kind of paganistic delusion that that coupled with Christianity, religion didn't really make much sense to me overall, because it just all felt like fantasy. And so I went on like a God kick a couple times growing up, just like really being into it. But I mean, as I got a little older, I came out officially as an atheist around the age of about 14.
Okay.
Largely because my dad introduced me to it. When he returned from California, I was 12, and so he had gotten into atheism. I can say into atheism because it was kind of like his thing for a while. And he came back and started kind of walking us through the Christian idea and that kind of thing. But he had kind of an in where he didn't want to say, oh, well, that's not real. Like, he wanted us to make our own decisions about things. So he was overall supportive. He did have me go to atheist summer camp, which was really fun.
I didn't know there was such a thing.
There is an atheist summer camp, guys.
Is there atheist Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts too?
Dude, there isn't, but we've talked about it. That's come up.
Because I know that there are definitely Muslim Boy Scouts, because I had friends go through them.
I did not know that.
Yeah, because of the organization of the Boy Scouts, And the Girl Scouts to some extent too, but especially the Boy Scouts are a specifically religious organization because like all of their things factor back to God and things like, which is how they were able to discriminate against gays so effectively in the early thousands, because they were a religious
there
cult.
being so many homosexuals in the Boy Scouts.
It's always the way it works out, isn't
There's
it?
one right here.
Oh, you were a Boy Scout. That does not surprise
I was
me.
a
You were
Boy Scout
I
when I
believe
was a
it.
kid.
Yeah, he's got a Boy Scout vibe.
Yeah, I was
But
in
in a good way.
I was in the Boy Scouts till 5th grade, and then I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I remember it was the most nonchalant thing in the world where they kept calling me and asking me if I was going to a meeting, and I'm like, no. And they're like, so do you want to just drop out? And I'm like, yeah. I was 12 years old. No, I was 11 years old, and I was like, that was the first time I was given the power to drop out of anything, and I took it, and it was glorious.
That was easy.
Yeah. It's like, wait, I have an option?
I don't have to be around
yeah.
stinky boys anymore who are going to make fun of me because I can't watch Friends on Thursday nights. What do you do?
Yeah. So that was, and the big thing though that my dad really did kind of harp on was the whole like ghost investigation situation.
Yes, because as we know,
Because-
the ghost investigator almost became your dad.
Yeah, literally. So there were times where we'd be watching like Ghost Hunters or something in my dad's house, and he'd come into the room, and that was like the last straw for him. He was like, okay, I don't care what your mom does, and I don't care if you choose to believe in ghosts or Christianity or what have you, but you are not watching that shit in my house. It was like the first time he ever censored anything for us.
It triggered your dad.
But anyway, and he didn't even bother really censoring it, but he said, okay, guys, let's have a come to Jesus moment here, which is funny because it's ironic. And I thought it was funny. Anyway, so he like sat us down and he was like, you know, talking us through the logic of ghost investigating and stuff like that. He's like, have you ever really seriously seen a ghost? And we were like, no. And he was like, do you really honestly think ghosts exist? And we were like, no. And he was like, okay, then let's move on with our lives and
Let's
don't
move
watch
on.
that shit in my house anymore.
Santa, next.
You know, I really like that approach that he took to that.
Yeah.
You know, where it's just like it's leaving it to some extent up to your kids to decide what they believe. You show them a menu of options and you let them decide.
Yeah. See, like that was my dad's whole thing where, I mean, because we went to like Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts for a short amount of time. I quit Girl Scouts after juniors, I think, because I hated it. And so my dad ended up sending me to it was called Camp Quest. I think now it's called Camp 42. And it's grown a lot over the years, but it's literally a camp for kids that come from like free thinking families.
Okay.
And so a lot of it is, they're like the regular camping stuff. It's like hiking and all that stuff. But like they also do like logic games and science experiments and stuff like that. Philosophy, we talk about famous free thinkers. And I was a camper, and then I was a counselor in training, and then I was a counselor for a couple of years. And it was a really great experience. A lot of great people that I met through there.
See, I'm going to echo Wallace and say I like that approach quite a lot because it was the opposite of how we were like. My parents, strangely enough, accidentally did it both ways because they did raise us to be critical thinkers and put us in situations where we would critically think. But then when they were explaining their positions that had no moral real defense, like we'll use abortion as an instance, there was no nuance to the discussion whatsoever. It was just everything the Catholic Church was telling them. But then because they were so hardlined on that and we learned critical thinking skills from our lawyer father, it played out against him, basically. He trained the army that overthrew him politically in our family, much like Haiti in the 1800s. So it was, and I think that's why I'm so bitter in a lot of ways towards them on those sort of things, is that like if there was no nuance to discussion whatsoever, it was like the Pope's way or the highway on this. It's baby murder, and then you get older and you realize, oh wait, kind of what all they told me was garbage. So
Yeah.
there isn't a lot of nuance to the fact that there was no nuance in our household, and that's where the bitterness comes from.
Well, in my household, it was kind of schizophrenic. Because on one hand, my mom, who was always a searcher, like she was always looking for something to fill the hole inside of her.
The God hole, yeah.
Yeah, the God hole. For a while there, she was into like fundamentalist Christianity, And she held on to some of those things, especially the homophobic things. But then she went through these phases where for a while there she was into Hinduism and Buddhism. For a while there she claimed to be an atheist. And it was kind of like religion du jour when it came to my mom. And a lot of it came down to like, she was deeply traumatized by the things that had happened to her, plus she was an addict, plus she was dealing with mental illness. And she was really searching for some kind of meaning to her life. And much like there's a George Strait song from the 80s, looking for love in all the wrong places. She was looking for love. I don't think they were all the wrong places, but I don't think she went into it with the right mindset.
Yeah.
See, I like what you were saying, like it was sort of religion du jour, because I do think that like there are components of every religion that have good ideas on like the spirituality aspect of humanity and things like that. But for the most part, most religions are kind of like an all or nothing du jour. It's like, oh, you accept everything we say or you accept nothing. Like, okay, nothing.
That's a really interesting mindset to have, because like I know some people, like Ryan and I have this discussion all the time where he's like, I just wish people would commit, like, because he's like, you're going to believe in one thing but not another thing, but it's all in the same doctrine. And I'm like, well, I would rather someone believe something that's harmless versus something that's harmful. Yeah. Even if it means like picking and choosing. Your mom reminds me of my mom. I call her an equal opportunity believer. And that's exactly the same thing as like she would go from being pagan to her own weird religion to Christianity, then to God knows what else, kind of cycling between all of those things. And I mean, it was very confusing growing up for me, especially with the delusions that she had on top of trying to figure out the whole religion thing.
Yeah, on one level, I appreciate what she was trying to do because I think all of us should try to do that, maybe in a more chill way, where you're not committing fully to one thing on Monday and then something completely different on Tuesday. I'm exaggerating for effect, but growing up like you, that's kind of how I felt. Like, who am I getting today? Which version of my mom am I going to get today? Is it the Buddhist or is it, the hardline Pentecostal?
That was really interesting for me too when I came out as an atheist, because there was one Sunday where I realized, and I think maybe I was 16 at this point. So I'd been identifying as an atheist for a good amount of time and just kind of started to realize that I could make my own decisions about what I do day to day. So one Sunday morning, I just said, hey, I'm not going to church today. And she was like, why? And I was like, because I'm an atheist. And she was like, well, other than that.
Which that was kind of my dad's perspective on religion. He just like... He'd go he'd go to like a middle of the road Protestant Christian church for Christmas and Easter, and for the rest of the year it was laissez-faire. He didn't have time for church. He was just working and trying to support a family.
Well, her whole big argument, so like my grandparents, her parents were avid churchgoers, like perfect attendance churchgoers, and they actually handed out awards for that at my church.
Oh, they did in my church too. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, wild. And so they got like a 50-year perfect attendance award or something like that, like only missing church for like grave illnesses, like crazy. And they'd both teach Sunday school, and like my grandpa taught the adults, my grandma taught the children.
There was Sunday school for adult, or you mean like CCD sort of things, or like?
Well, they happened at the same time. It was literally like Sunday school, and they would do
like Bible study.
Yeah, Bible study basically.
Like Bible study. I got
but we always called it Sunday school.
Makes sense.
And so,
did you just call that because you were making fun of it, or is that what they literally called it?
What?
Sunday school for adults.
No, they called it Sunday school. Yeah, it was all Sunday school for everybody. And it was just a wild thing to me that, so when I had that conversation with my mom, my grandfather was still alive, but my grandmother had been dead for a little while at that point. And so her whole thing was, I said, I'm not going because I'm an atheist. And then she was like, well, what about your grandfather? And I was like, what about him? You know, what do you mean? And she was like, well, he's going to notice that you're not there. And I was like, sure. Yeah, that makes sense. He also lives like 3 blocks away, so I can come see him after. And she was like, oh, so you just don't care about your family? I'm like, are you hearing Yiddish when I speak?
It's so funny you mentioned this too, because I was actually talking with Lauren about this the other day, because like that was kind of like the final straw in my parents' thing too, to try to get us to go to church, was to guilt us, like very particularly whenever we would go to the beach every summer. My mom has a friend who, for lack of a better phraseology, is a really terrible person. Also, like very Protestant, is a prominent Holocaust denier, I have found out later in my life, despite the fact that her father was a prosecutor at Nuremberg.
Oh my God. The cognitive dissonance. I swear to God.
It takes all kinds in this world.
She's a mismatch of everything, because she was like also a strongly pro-choice, strongly Republican person my entire life too, which the two do not really mix very well. To put it like, I don't think this is a particularly good person as an adult, and I tried not to have anything to do with her. But she also hated Catholics, as a lot of Protestants do. And when we as kids wouldn't want to go to church at the beach, she would like guffaw and cackle in the background because the Catholic kids didn't want to go to church. And my dad actually at one point was like, oh, come on, if you guys don't go to church, you're just going to give her all the ammunition that she needs. And that was a very weird spot to be caught in as a kid. It's like, I think going to church was actually the lesser of two evils in that case.
Yeah. And that's the other thing about church, that I've overall not, gone regularly for a very long time, but Ryan's family is religious. We've gone a few times with his family, and generally it's, like no big deal. We're going for a holiday or some kind of special occasion. And it just doesn't hold the same weight to me anymore. Like I'll just go and be like, wow, this is what's happening. But wouldn't you know it, the songs still choke me up.
Oh yeah, the songs are beautiful.
Yeah.
I remember there was an Always Sunny in Philadelphia episode a couple of years ago where, they do a lot of episodes that are critical of religion, but it was one in which Puff Daddy was the guest star, and they were trying to go through various cons, and one of them was religion, and they're sitting in a Catholic church sort of making fun of how droll On Eagle's Wings is. And that was a song that always teared me up as a kid, and I still think is a pretty beautiful church song. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with. Maybe
I'm
it's
sure I've heard it at some point.
I feel like it's a fairly Catholic song as far as the things go.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and that joke did not work on me at all, because I'm like, this was like, my dad mentions that they played that song at his dad's funeral and he cried during it, and so like I have a special connection to that particular song where there's a lot of emotion involved. So I 100% agree that some of those songs are still chokers.
At my great-grandfather's funeral, my grandmother wanted me to sing "You Raise Me Up."
Actually,
yeah, it was really pretty.
Really pretty
song.
My uncle who just passed away in December, my cousin Kaylee actually sang that song before, like as a preamble to the entire funeral, and it was so gorgeous, and because she was at one point in her life a fantastic soloist, choirist, and singer, and it was very sad, very emotional, and very beautiful at the same time. So that's a really good one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Death.
Yeah, death. Okay, so I'm glad we're back on death, because I have things to say. Because I was thinking like, oh, this is very topical as what's been in the news lately about the submarine situation.
We all live in...
Well, not anymore.
Nope.
There's a person at work who's a little bit of a nut for conspiracy theories, and he told me tonight when I was working, he's like, man, this is all just a giant distraction. And usually I would disagree with him on principle, but I was like, there has been a disproportionate amount of media and news time devoted to this submarine that imploded.
Oh, don't get into the rabbit hole. That's how they get you. They're just like, don't you think this is a little too much?
Yeah, don't you think your girlfriend is hot like me?
Yeah,
or wish.
It's a trap.
Hal, stop making bad jokes.
So I've been watching a lot of TikToks about this, so I consider myself to be an expert.
Red flag number 15.
I don't do China talk in my house.
So there's a lot of discourse on the internet right now because, like, on one hand, people have died, and that's a sad thing in general, and you're not supposed to make fun of people dying. On the other hand, a lot of people are making some hilarious jokes about the whole situation. So do I feel bad for laughing? Yes, I do, but also they're hilarious.
Are you rehearsing a routine?
Right now?
Yeah.
No. But that would be really good for my stand-up, wouldn't it?
I think the best joke I heard on that, which was actually the place that I heard that there was a submarine problem, was something Glessner posted a couple of days ago where it was like, everybody's wondering where this submarine is. And I'm like, the ocean floor, dude.
It's in
Duh.
the ocean. But okay, I love Andrew Glessner, and he is hilarious. But when you think about it, the ocean is terrifying and way bigger than we think it is. So that's...
Oh, yeah. In fact,
I
have... So some of my cousins, whenever we go to the beach, had this weird phobia that never affected me, but they would not go swimming in areas where they couldn't see the bottom of the ocean for fear that, like, something horrible was going to come up and, like, attack or take them or whatever. So...
See,
not just sharks, but like there are horrors in the water that
Here there be dragons.
Yeah. Just like giant. Like I remember I learned this from a Sandman comic that and the subsequent Wikipedia page that I looked this up on to confirm, but giant squids were not found like actual specimens of them were not found until very recently. They only knew they existed because they found sucker marks the size of giant squids on the sides of boats.
Yep.
So imagine how horrifying that must have been for like a sailor in that day to like, yeah, we never saw it. We just know that it's sucking on our boat right now.
Yeah. No, it's terrifying. The ocean is a terrifying place. You would not. There are two things I will never do. One of them is be in a submarine because I'm fucking terrified of it. Just honestly, it's the scariest thing to me. The other thing is more likely for me to do, but very close to never, is like going into space, like in a space shuttle.
Oh, yeah.
And both of those things like have the same problem, right? Something goes wrong, you're fucked. There's nothing to do in that situation. So I honestly, submarines are not my jam. They terrify me.
And just to, if you'll grant me an indulgence for pedantic corner, the thing that imploded was actually submersible. If it were a submarine, they would have been a lot better off because they could have just powered away on their own.
Like there's more air.
A submersible doesn't have any way to actually move very far. It's always connected.
So even worse.
Yeah, it has to, in order to be like towed back in, they needed the boat at the surface to bring them up.
Yeah.
Which is part of the problem. And and they were using allegedly a Xbox controller to navigate
don't trust
with their
Xbox
thing.
to do jack shit.
So as funny as that sounds, there have been like a lot of incredibly weird applications of older technology. Like there have been several Bitcoin farms that have been made out of old PlayStation 3s. And actually, because the PlayStation 3 had like a ridiculous disproportionate computing power to what it needed to do, there were like Stanford students who created like supercomputers by just connecting like 500 PS3s to each other. All things people were either throwing away or just trading in for $20. And they built a supercomputer out of it because like the chips that they used it had to be the original. Like it couldn't be like a PS3 Lite or Slim or anything like that. But like, some of these machines are pretty...
Yeah, I don't doubt the ingenuity, but as soon as I saw a game controller in the
You're like,
submersible,
they're fucked. They're doomed.
Like,
I would have
if you're charging me
turned
$250,000, at least
left.
get PS5 or better.
Yeah,
I
right?
mean, we're talking about people spending $250,000.
Well, yeah, and I've been seeing a lot of people like doing the math on what that actually means to a billionaire, and I always forget like how much money $1 billion is. It's
Oh my God.
simply too much money.
Cracked actually did a really good thought, like not thought experiment, but like illustration of like how much money $1 billion is. Because one of the things I think this country does is like inflate numbers to the point where you don't think $1 billion is as big of number as you think. And they like went down like what you would need to buy to spend $1 billion, and they started with the most expensive house in the country, $175 million right there. Okay, most expensive car, those are about $5 million. Let's say you get 20 of them. Okay, and you get a fleet of them, and they would go on and on and on. Buy your own private island. Strangely enough, not as much money as the most expensive house, $30 million. And by the end that they had accumulated this weird house, this private island, a fleet of expensive cars, they still had $150 million left over. It is astonishingly difficult to buy domestic things that equal $1 billion.
Yeah.
And yet, there's really great, psychological studies about what brings people happiness. And I read one of them, and don't ask me to cite it, but
Get me a bibliography right now.
After you get a raise to the level of about 70 grand per year, which now, thanks to inflation, it's probably like 80 grand.
Yeah.
But they actually calculated the level to which the average person, or rather the average American, is happy. And they found that after you get past 70 grand per year, it is diminishing returns.
Yeah.
The more money you make doesn't necessarily make you any happier, doesn't necessarily improve your life or your outlook on the world. It's just more money in your bank account.
So this was a phenomenon we noticed with editors when my roommate and I were working reality TV, because the way that reality TV worked then, and I assume now as well, is like if you made editor, there was a ridiculously sharp uptick in your income. Like you went from assistant editors were pulling in like maybe $1,200 or $1,300 a week. When you got to an editor, you were making about $5,000 a week. Like a ridiculous pay jump for just a junior editor. And all of them were always like super stressed. All of them were amazingly strapped for cash, which I didn't understand. And my roommate Alex was kind of like, you just got to make sure your lifestyle isn't inflated. Like some of these people, like there was a guy who was about our age who busted his butt and got made a junior editor one day. And the next day he came in like a brand new BMW and like had gotten a really fancy apartment and all that. And I thought about what my roommate had told me about lifestyle inflation. It's like, yeah, you got to be careful, like, because that person's going to be just as strapped for cash, but less happy because there's more stuff that you have to take care of.
And what's awaiting that person at the end?
Can't take it with you.
There's going to be a mound of ashes in Cape Henlopen State Park.
It's gonna be
just
mud.
a clump in the sea.
Well, and see, I 100% agree with what you're saying, Wallace, and you know, from that article that you refused to cite. And but I've surpassed that number at this point in my life, which is, first of all, weird. Thank you.
Yeah, nice. Shannon.
Not by much, but like is nice.
It's a lot more than I make. So.
And what's really great about it, though, is like it is amazing how much happier you are, not even with a lot of money, but with enough money to pay your bills and also not feel guilty about the splurges that you do. Like last couple of days, I got DoorDash because I couldn't leave the branch to go get my lunch, so I had to get it delivered. And I had a heart attack looking at the price of it, but I still did it because I was like, okay, it's not going to break my bank. And it's something that I can do. And so, I mean, being able to survive and do a little extra is honestly like, I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, and a lot of those jobs are kind of going by the way, like, my job right now, the one I've had for the last 6 years, is actually the first job I ever had where I really could afford to be an adult and still have the indulgence, like the little extra just to like get film equipment or get a dinner if I feel like it. And like, I still see all of my friends like it. Like we were talking a little bit at work tonight, and like some of the crew members at WITF, split their time between 3 different production companies, get no benefits or anything like that. And my first thought was like, well, thank God I don't have to do that anymore, because that's like, there's like Wallace was saying, what's the end to this? It never leads to a full-time job, like ever, except for like 1% of people. And then I don't know. This way be death, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it leads me to the idea, to try to wrap up our disparate threads here.
Never gonna happen.
But I have this approach to most things in life. It's not really about the end. It's about the middle.
Yeah.
It's about how you spend your life, because we already know the ending. Spoiler alert, we all die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whether you're a billionaire who can afford to try to go down to the Titanic in a tin can, or whether you're kind of the life that I came from, growing up in a trailer park, working class. Regardless of who you are, you have an expiration date, and if you don't try to, at least spread some happiness to try to improve other people's lives, then why the heck are you even here?
Yeah.
I think so many people spend so much mental bandwidth asking themselves, what will make me happy? How can I be happy? And the answer is really quite simple. It doesn't need a whole lot of thought behind it. Be a good person.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, like all these religions that we talked about, there's differences in ideology. You know, like we observe them, we know them. There's vast differences in ideology, especially among the fundamentalists. However, the more telling thing, I think, is to study the commonalities between the religions, the areas where they intersect. And just about every religion on the planet has some version of the golden rule. I think that's telling. That right there is the meaning of life. You don't need to pay anyone to tell you the meaning of life. It's right there.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. Like you were saying too, like just try to make other people happy and just be as kind as you can. Tell the truth where you can, because you can't. The world is complicated. Like sometimes you can't always do both of those things, but like just try to do it as much as possible, and be a good person, like you were saying.
Yeah, and the more we strive for things, the unhappier we get.
Yeah, I think
like you were saying, like you reach a certain plateau where if you've managed to satisfy the Maslow's hierarchy, if you've managed to satisfy the big stuff, then anything more is just kind of gravy.
Yeah.
And the more you try to accumulate, at least in my own experience, the times when I've tried to accumulate more things, I've been less happy about it.
So what you were saying too, like ties into what I was going to talk about as well. Like I feel like my dad is obsessed with money in that case. Like a good illustration of this is like I was watching The Greatest Showman over at their house one night, and there's just a scene where like they have like 6 or 7 little girls dancing in a pageant at the end of the movie, and my dad like walked by, looked at it, and was like, "Oh man, their parents must be so proud. They're making thousands for doing this." And that's like just kind of his mindset for everything. In fact, I don't know if you were at our house for Memorial Day when we were talking about this, Wallace, but we were talking about this podcast, and Kathy and Steve were like, "Oh, we really enjoy the podcast. It sounds good. It seems nice." And my dad's sort of gruff remark was like, "Are you making any money from it?" I'm like, "Nope." He's like, "You could be." Probably not. And that was all he had to say about it. But my parents and I got into a little bit of an argument back in November when we were driving back from a friend's funeral outside of Philadelphia. And one of my mom's college friends actually is married, or she's deceased now, but was married to the man who ran, I think it was Prudential, for like 10 to 15 years. And he's not a billionaire, but he's like an 800 or 900 millionaire. His name is Peter Lynch, and he was like a big figure in finance.
I know him. Well, I don't literally know him. I know of him.
I've met him. We were actually guests at his house several times, or houses, because he had many houses growing up. Like we went to his house in Massachusetts, which had an arcade in the basement, which a 5-year-old Hal went crazy for. And then we went skiing with him when I was like in 6th grade. And I've met him several times as a child. But my parents were talking about them because my dad worships money. And I'm like, well, would you want to be like because this guy never went to any of his kids' things. And he briefly quit Prudential when he missed a lot of important things, but then went back to working. And my mom was like, "Oh, and they did so much for charity too. They did so many things." And my response was cynically like, "If you're still worth $800 million, you didn't do nearly enough for charity." And this sparked a bit of a fight because also there was a personal connection with my parents to this person. But I totally agree with that sentiment. Like if you still have a net worth of $800 million, it's a very difficult thing to spend any of that money, and if you cannot hold yourself as a charitable person if you still hoarded that much wealth, in my opinion.
No, I agree. Because like it's the practicality of it all, honestly. It's like it's not practical to have multiple houses. It's not other than the investment value, but then you're just making more money that you're not going to use.
So I feel like some indulgences are okay. Like you could have a beach property if you were fabulously wealthy or something like that. But just off the top of my head, the Lynches had a horse farm in Ireland. They had a ski resort house that we went to up in Vermont. They had this gargantuan house in Massachusetts, like on the outskirts of Boston, and then a house in Boston that they were using when he was working. Also, because he graduated from Penn, they owned a house in Philadelphia, and he probably owned more properties than that too. Like there was probably like a snowbird facility in like Florida or a warmer state, but and those were just the properties off the top of my head. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, and like have a couple properties, sure, totally fine, but I mean, when it comes to buying a fleet of the most expensive
Yeah,
car,
exactly.
like that does, first of all, those depreciate in value. Second of all, they come with their own expenses, and then you have to think about the carbon footprint that you're putting out there with all of this consumerism that you're anything that you purchase is going to have rippling consequences. And so it just doesn't make any sense really to have that much money.
See, I think of it even simpler. Like, how many people could you help with $800 million? Like, how many college scholarships could you give out? But debatable whether or not that'll actually do anything for you. But, how many houses could you buy for needy people, for instance? How much could you, like Wallace was saying, invest to make people happy?
Right. I mean, you could make 8 people millionaires. 800 people millionaires.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
And one person that I kind of look to for this is for example, Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
He has amassed an extraordinary wealth, but he's put it into companies that employ people. He's put it into charities that give back to the community. And for himself, like Warren Buffett's a pretty simple man. You don't see him driving around in luxury vehicles. He has the habit of like going to McDonald's and getting an Egg McMuffin every day.
It's a good habit.
Like, it's a small indulgence.
Yeah.
And really the truly wealthy people do not throw their wealth around wantonly. They don't spend it on frivolous things. They don't try to showboat. They actually use their money in principled ways. And unfortunately, in our society, what we value are the peacocks.
Yeah.
We the Kardashians, the Kanye Wests. Those are the people who get all the attention on the Tic Tacs.
Grandpa.
And unfortunately, it sets a bad example for people who can't afford to peacock but want to, because somehow they believe doing so will make them happy.
I'm looking forward to the day in which, whenever it comes, like maybe if he's deceased, not wishing death on him, but like the day that Donald Trump's finances are actually opened up, because there is a very strong possibility that his net worth is very much in the negative.
Oh, yeah.
That it's all like, I mean, this is also neoliberal class, like capitalism at its best, is that you use whatever capital you have to try to get loans on other properties, which is something he's done spectacularly. But also, like, he's underwater on basically every single thing he owns. It's all borrowed money. So I'm looking forward to the day. And that's why his tax returns never came out, I'm very certain, is because, anybody he runs against is probably wealthier than he is, actually, by total assets versus liabilities.
No, I believe it.
Yeah. So death.
Death.
But ultimately it's about what you do.
I agree with that.
It is like, that is fundamentally, how we are judged if we are judged. You look at every religion on the planet. If you ignore some of the dictates of, you must believe this, you must believe that. If you strip all that stuff away, what you're left with is the golden rule.
Yeah, like on that, and tying into, I think, what we wanted to talk about initially on this podcast too, when I did move back from California, like 3 years of like selling my soul, it's like slave wages for reality TV and some films, I was absolutely miserable because I was broke all the time. I didn't have a ton of close friends. It was just not a good time and place. Oh, excuse me. And then when I came back here, I was kind of like, I would rather just have a 9-to-5 job and make movies on the side and do what I want and do what makes me happy than try to climb in an industry that's probably just going to drive me crazy. And I think I've succeeded at doing that for the most part. I mean, there's bumps.
Yeah.
My job isn't perfect. The movie stuff definitely isn't perfect, but I think all of us have fun doing creative stuff outside of things on our own terms too, which is important.
I think that's what it's about, is living life on your own terms too, because the golden rule is super important. I do want to also say, though, is like, it's not just about what you do for other people, but what you do to enrich yourself and how you take care of yourself so the bank I work for, the CEO said something that really kind of resonated with me, even though he is also a rich white man. he said, you know, we're supposed to be coming up with these personal purpose statements. And I've been struggling with mine a little bit. I've been kind of like, oh gosh, personal purpose statement. Really, what is my purpose? And now,
Also, that
PPS.
sounds so
so
much
now I'm
like
getting paid
jargon.
to have a existential crisis. So thank you.
You
At
can have
least
that
you're
for
getting
free.
paid for that.
Yeah, right. I mean, well, okay. Now that I think about it that way. And he said, like, his personal purpose is to take care of his corner. And I think that's, like, a really nice way to think about it, because you think of your corner like you're in your corner, right? Like, so the way you take care of yourself, but also taking care of, like, your community, your friends, your family, like, taking care of your corner, because, like, you know, we're not all going to have some wide-reaching legacy, you know? Like, we're not going to be saints or, like, written in textbooks, maybe. Not all of us are those kinds of people, and that's totally okay.
That's
like,
way too much pressure. I'd rather just be forgotten, honestly.
well, but that's what I'm saying is, like, focus on your corner, and you'll impact the people that you care about, and that, you know, then maybe they'll go off and be written in textbooks and things.
And I think what you were saying too is, like, I feel like all three of us, especially with the VidJam stuff, but also like with improv and stand up, we all three like specifically try to be inclusive with everything. And I think that is an attitude that has, like, most people in these art circles do. Like, I always, like, all of us always have, like, for VidJam, for instance, the same regular collaborators, like you and me, Shannon, do things. And then Wallace always has, like, Carol, Lisa, on his teams. But then there's always, like, a lot of people that come and go on certain teams. Like, I thought Kush was fantastic in Return to Me, and it's the only VidJam I've seen her in, because I think that you might have been the only person to actually invite her to be a part of one.
Yeah.
Based on what because I told her I'd love to do something with her, and she was like, let me know. Nobody ever asks me, so...
Well, and so much of that is serendipity as well, and kind of being open-minded. But I wanted to circle back to kind of your thought there, Shannon, about what our purpose is. And, like, fundamentally, I've purposefully tried to wall myself off because there's so much noise in the universe. And I really ask myself, even when I'm creating something, you know, am I leaving this world a little bit better than I found it?
Exactly.
And if I'm not, then I don't do it.
Right.
I really, and that sounds kind of highfalutin, but I really do genuinely think that. Like, everything that I do, I try for it to have some kind of positive, not necessarily positive, because lots of my movies have involved death, but, like, meditations on, like, what it means to forgive and what it means to build a community, what it means to have empathy. There's so much in the world right now that, and I think some of this is a side effect of us having so much connectivity and there being all these socioeconomic pressures as well that I think drive people insane sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
That there's just a lot of really negative stuff out in the universe. And I've decided really purposefully, you know, on many levels, I'm very selective about what I let in and what I put back out. You know, like Donald Trump, for example, I'm not going to comment on Donald Trump because I don't have to.
Yeah.
You know,
Because people speak for themselves. Their actions speak for themselves. And, you know, it's a shame that in some cases, a lot of cases, you know, for some reason, what they speak for themselves resonates with other people and grows and infests. And that's unfortunate. But honestly, I just kind of have this overarching, like, mindset of good win out, you know, like it will eventually be okay. Like, things will, you know, people are kind of, it's built into us that we want to survive and that we want to, like, cohabitate in a productive way. And I think that, you know, there's just so many of us at this point that, you know, we've kind of lost sight of that kind of tribal, you know, take care of each other kind of mindset. But I think that, you know, you don't have to, that's the thing. I used to argue with people on the internet all the time. And, like, I used to argue about religion all the time. And I just don't want to argue anymore because nobody's, a lot of activists that I've met or that I've known, they'll say like, oh, well, you might change one person's mind. And it's like, but...
Not on Reddit.
Yeah, well, but the thing is, it's really not our responsibility. We put so much for like people like us who really genuinely care about humanity and we care about doing the right thing and putting a positive vibe out there. It can be super frustrating that not everybody has that mindset, but it's also not our, like, we're putting too much pressure on ourselves by like trying to force other people to see the things the way we do.
What this reminds me of is like, I wish I could think of it off the top of my head, like what's in it. But I remember Ashley Madavi posted something like months ago about like what is in your control and what is outside of your control. And I loved it so much. I actually printed it out and I have it both at my cubicle and right by my name tag by my cubicle. Because I was like, this is a good reminder for everybody, like what you can control and what you can't control. And the idea was just to focus on what you can control, like, you know, rub your chest, your arms will take care of themselves.
It's about like where your sphere of influence is and what is the most effective thing that you can do at any one moment. In some ways, for me, I am increasingly, engaged in certain things. You know, I'm the board chair of the LGBT Center, and we're doing a lot of really important work there. But a lot of it is work that happens quietly. A lot of it is work that's important to specific people, but is not necessarily done in a political realm. And I think it's important to kind of choose where you want to funnel your energy, where you think it will have the greatest impact for the greatest good. And I just, I see some of what is happening out in the world, and I see a lot of it, with my day job, and I don't even feel angry anymore at the bigots. I just feel kind of sad because imagine if they funneled that energy towards something positive.
Exactly.
Imagine if they took that passion and tried to leave the world a better place with it. It must be an incredibly lonely life to spend so much of it, and we have a limited time on this earth, to spend so much of your life on social media yelling at people.
Yeah.
That's a sad way to live.
It's very sad.
Well, and I feel the same way about like people who are just like generally nasty to other people. I mean, it's just like it doesn't cost you anything to be kind. It doesn't. And I know that's like super cliche, and it's probably on a Marshall's little canvas poster or something. But I mean, honestly, the other person that you're interacting with isn't ready for you to be coming in and all like frustrated or angry. And there's very little things to be frustrated or angry about, really. I mean, when it really comes down to it. And I say that to like everyone I know. Like there's very little because I have friends that like they have like anxiety and they have self-esteem issues, and they're like, I'm afraid of doing this because I don't want to break it, or I don't want to do something wrong, or I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I always tell them there is very little that you can do that cannot be fixed.
Yeah.
And that's like a hard and fast rule. And I think that's really important in like adult friendships where, even if you feel like something you're about to say may cause the other person harm, but it needs to be said, say it. And then, we can repair what has happened. Like, don't be afraid to, make a change if in the end, even though it's a little scary and even though it might in the moment make you feel uncomfortable, it'll turn out okay in the end because you're going to work to fix it, and the other person's hopefully going to be on board with that too. And if they're not, then
break up with that friend.
Yeah.
Well, and that reminds me of something that I read somewhere. It's not a Wallace original, but it's something along the same lines that I try to apply on my best days to how I interact with people. I try to, especially if I get that feeling, that feeling, and you feel it in your chest, and you you know, for me, I call it I've got my Irish up. When I have my Irish up, I try to take a breath and step back and be like, is what I'm about to say, is it kind?
Mm-hmm.
Is it true? And is it necessary?
Yep.
If it doesn't hit those 3 points, I need to reassess, at least at a minimum, how I'm going to say it.
Yeah.
Something can be unkind but necessary and true. And when you find yourself in that position where you really feel the need to say something, you just find a more kind way to say it.
Yeah.
Mm.
And certainly if it's not true, you shouldn't say it.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not necessary, you could say it, but you probably shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of has helped me a lot because, you know, growing up the way I did, I had a lot of self-esteem issues. I had a lot of anxiety, and I still do. But that kind of helped me, you know, simultaneously be more confident in a way that I can speak up.
Mm-hmm.
And also deal with that anxiety of, oh, am I going to say the right thing or the wrong thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey.
Hmm.
We got really deep.
Yeah, we definitely.
Not as deep as other people who are no longer with us, but that was a bad joke. That was
dead.
Oh, I
decent.
see what you did there. Oh.
Sometimes it just takes a bad joke to snap us back into
I know.
mood. So
I'm
Well,
the worst.
and just think about like they're part of the universe now.
Good for them.
yeah, they're probably in you because their particles have been used to
No,
grow
they
food.
are. Their particles are in the ocean, and I don't touch that shit. So
But eventually their particles will be consumed by plankton. The plankton will be consumed by minnows. The minnows will be consumed by tuna, and eventually you might be eating a tuna.
I think the odds of me eating that specific tuna are
I eat a lot
slim
of
to
tuna,
none.
so it's probably pretty like.
Yeah, I eat so much tuna. I guarantee you, I'll be eating that tuna.
You know what that kind of makes me think of? Like, has anybody here a reader of Chuck Palahniuk for very much of his?
no.
Oh, I used to read a lot of him.
Yeah, one of the things that always struck with me, speaking of like dead influence on the world, is like one of his random stray observations he kept repeating in Lullaby. I don't know if you remember that book. Was that for a long period in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, all of the like laughter that you would hear on sitcoms had already been recorded by like Lucy and the Honeymooners, and they just kept recording it. And statistically speaking, most of those people were probably dead at that point. So like you were laughing along with dead people, he would say all the time. Like
That's cool.
dead people laughing.
But I love that feeling, and I'm sure the Germans have a word for it.
Guten Schmachterloch.
But that feeling when you feel connected to everything that's come before you and everything that will come after you.
Sometimes I get a similar feeling about like when I'm in a crowd or like I'm on a long drive, like looking at other people in cars. I'll think to myself like that person has a whole life. A whole life. And there are people that they know that have whole lives. And that's weird. And I think about it, I'm like, you see probably 5 people every day that you never have seen before. And that, I don't know what the statistic is really on that, but that sounds at least probable.
Yeah.
And they may appear in your dreams at some point because that's how you project all random people in your dreams.
Yeah.
Are faces that you've seen and forgotten.
Okay, thanks for freaking me out again.
Yeah. Oh, you.
I mean, I knew that.
never
I
heard
just
that.
I conveniently forget things that freak me out, Hal.
Oh, I
That's
think
how
about
my
them-
trauma works.
I think about them all the time, but
That's
they don't
why
bother
I don't
me.
have a reliable
like a dog.
memory before the age of 12.
Yeah, oh man, that's some stuff.
Trauma.
Yeah, what Wallace had said too, like as a quick aside to, like, I guess talk about more upbeat things for our remaining time. But like, it is very isolating, I think, for people to live like that in a cycle of hate. And the reason I was thinking about this was I mentioned on an earlier podcast that like I had an older friend that after the last VidJam had sent me a Facebook message saying, hey, let's do something together. And this is a person that I've unfollowed on Facebook for years now because he went down this cycle of hate where he was just posting all sorts of horrible things. He definitely bit hard into the incel slash like anti-feminist red pill community. And I was talking with Lauren about him because Lauren actually did work with him at the Renaissance Fair for 1 year and had similar opinions. She was like, yeah, he went dark and went downhill real fast. But she also said something that I've spent some, like at this point, this person has been a bad, like perpetrator of hate online for like 10 years for me now. But she put it into perspective. She's like, this guy was somebody people absolutely loved to work with. He was super friendly. He was super nice, and people wanted to do things with him. And then all of a sudden, like over the course of a year, something just snapped at him, and he kept going further and further down this rabbit hole to the point where nobody wanted to do anything with him. And that made him, of course, dig in even deeper into hateful things. And now he's somebody that just nobody wants anything to do with. So, like, I think that the purpose of these communities of hate is to isolate you, because isolated people continue to go further down. Like, there's nothing that breaks somebody's hold on just hate like giving them a loving community of people who are not hateful.
Yeah, and I have several, partly because of where I grew up and just who I am. I certainly have people like that in my life who I have kind of distanced myself from.
Definitely.
Because of their toxic behavior, because of the way that they view the world. But I don't shut the door completely. I leave the door like just a little crack. I'm open to the idea like maybe one day they'll reach out to me.
See, I like to think that way too, but I keep getting burned every single time I do that. Like, I'll get burned. I'll be like, maybe he's not so bad a guy. How? Why did you think this? I don't know.
Yeah. I had one specific person who meant and means a lot to me, and unfortunately, they have some pretty profound mental illness. This person was gay and now claims not to be gay anymore.
Oh.
They're also living with the family that, they previously said abused them and gave them all this, fed them all this self-hating things. And I've struggled with that. Like, what is my responsibility in that situation? And where I've come down is like, I'm here, when they're ready to talk, I'm here for them. But I'm also not going to put up with abusive language and abusive rhetoric.
Exactly.
That makes me think of a quote from Kingdom of Heaven where it's like a king may move a man, but the soul still belongs to a man, which means essentially you are responsible for your own well-being and your own, somebody can tell you to do a bad thing all you want, but it's up to you to actually do it or not do it. So, yeah, I like the idea of keeping the door a little bit open, but I've just been, like I said, I've been burned so many times in the past. And part of this is because, like, my absolute best friend in the world, as I've talked about on the podcast before, this is how we became friends, and I softened a little bit, was I was a huge hard nut. And then freshman year of college, we were, like, mortal enemies in all of our philosophy classes because I was I was not a reasonable person in any of our debates. And then one day out of the blue, because we were both film students, like, I have to make a movie. You want to do this with me? I'm like, sure. And then we became friends, and the softening happened. And that is maybe one of the most profound things that happened to me in my life. And it's why I like to never necessarily count people out. It's just people keep disappointing me every single time I do that.
And unfortunately, that's part of that is part of life. Is like if you, being a human on the planet almost requires us to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
In order to love, we have to risk being hurt. And that is one of the it's one of the profound, it's a profound paradox of being a human, that in order to live fully, we have to risk something.
No risk it, no biscuit.
Yeah. If only we could just not risk anything and just move through the world. But
yeah, the only people who can do that are people who've inherited billions of dollars in hedge funds that collect 7% annually on their money.
Yeah, but then they pay $250,000 to go down to the Titanic and end up.
I'm so tired of the story already. I was tired of the story on the very first day, and people. Yeah. But anyway, so we got about like maybe 10 to 12 minutes left in our extended period of time. I do want to talk about, because Wallace had talked about wanting to talk about creativity and things like that on the podcast this time, because we do have, like, as Liz noted last week, by the time this episode airs, we have Fringe Festival coming up this week, And we'll have just finished the VidJam screening on Sunday because the podcast comes out on Mondays. So yeah, what do you want to talk about with creativity, Wallace?
Oh, I just figured it'd be part of our freewheeling conversation. I don't have anything specific.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah, it was related.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so
we
it-
touched upon it.
I think this whole conversation was very creative.
Yeah.
Meh. You with your freewheeling conversations that you're so good at.
Well, so I'll ask a question, and maybe that can
Ooh,
lead
yes.
us down a little a side pageant.
We love questions.
A windy wheely road.
Yeah. Well, so for both of you, I'm curious. For the pursuits that you follow, for Shannon, it's stand up and it's acting, and for Hal, it's filmmaking and stand up, and for me, it's mostly filmmaking and then acting occasionally. But
Don't forget
I try not
improv,
to.
too.
And improv. But yeah, I'll start with Shannon. What got you to this place where you feel like you want to risk something and do something creative?
That is a really good question. Stand-up specifically kind of came out of like a general love for stand-up and, just kind of seeing other people do it and being like, oh, that sounds kind of fun. I actually started doing stand-up because I was going to law school. And I started doing stand-up because I saw it as the closest kind of performative practice that I could do for public speaking and what an attorney would eventually have to do in a situation, which would be to be able to make a point and do it in a way for people to understand and for it to be engaging, kind of like the story building process of it. So it was very similar, the kind of thinking on your feet and being able to fluidly change topics and that kind of thing. So I started doing that for that purpose. And then about a year into doing stand-up, we went into the pandemic. And my whole plan completely changed. But since then, stand-up for me has been kind of a nice way to process my feelings and to tell stories. I've always loved to tell stories. And I think that's also where it comes from for acting for me too, is like I love to tell a story. I've also dabbled in short story writing, and I tried a novel once, but I don't have the attention span. Poetry, I did a lot of poetry back in the day.
Yeah.
I've just always needed to express myself, and I've felt that other people like it when I express myself, and I like attention and also praise. So those.
You're awesome at expressing yourself, Shannon.
Thank you. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, mine's a little bit, maybe a little bit more complicated with that. Like, I was actually I was always a terrible student in school, probably because I had some sort of ADD, or maybe I saw the futility of school in general, which is funny because I still retained all the information. I just never did projects and did poorly in tests. But the only time I actually started getting good in school was like when we discovered video editing my sophomore year of high school, and all of a sudden like I started applying that to things and got interested there. But my dad's voice about like worshiping money in general had imparted me the values of never doing anything unless you're going to get paid for it. Like, for instance, it's not just the podcast. Like he's been constantly for years nagging me that I should get paid for doing improv or anything like that too. And he was like, if you're not getting paid, you have to be in charge, which made me for years not help other people with their things. And then I sort of reached a breaking point in college when I realized that because of those mantras, I literally didn't do anything for 3 years of college outside of my own films. I never helped other friends with their films. I never like did stuff outside of there because it didn't benefit me. It was very sad and like selfish. This is kind of the conservative way in a lot of ways, life things. And also it kind of made you view people as just like resources and not actual people, which is a sociopath way of thinking. And so now like I'm kind of in the mindset where for the longest time I just wanted to do as much stuff as possible, like help people out with their movies or just do stand-up or improv or get all the experiences and money be damned. And that got me into more trouble because I overcommitted to too many things. But, the strive is really just to like do interesting things, have experiences and remember things because it's better than doing nothing, which is what I did for most of my life when I didn't have those mantras.
Yeah.
I think your dad, like, in some ways, he's probably doing it. He is doing it out of love. Like that guidance that he's giving you is like, I imagine from his perspective, it's like I want my son to do well. I want him to succeed in life. I want to protect him. And that is kind of like
That's what he knows.
his version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I will give you like maybe 50% on that. I think part of it is more selfish as well. Like it has to do with his legacy in general. Was wants his kids to have more success than he had, but also continually votes for politicians who make it impossible for us to have more success than he had. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do my own thing. I enjoy doing it. It's fun. It's made me a lot of friends. It's made me like a lot of good. It's given me a lot of good experiences, and that's really what it is. Like Wallace said, like we all end up dead. So why not just have the most entertaining time possible doing things before you end up dead?
Yeah. Wallace, how about you?
Well.
You thought you were going to get away
Yeah,
with it, didn't you?
I thought. Podcast over.
This is like in Uno when you play a draw 2 and we play 2 draw 2s on top of you. So now you draw 6. Go.
Well, it's funny. Like, so I had a somewhat similar experience to Hal because, so I always, movies, but also really I dabbled in a lot of stuff when I was a kid, and a lot of it was an escape. It was an escape. I don't want to overshare.
This is the oversharing podcast.
I also want to point out too,
I
because I don't think you've said this. You were actually trained as a carpenter before you became a journalist, right?
Jesus? Are you Jesus?
I will neither confirm nor deny. No, I'm not. No, I am not Jesus. Alas.
Sorry, we got him sidetracked.
But no, you're right. Hal. So. For me, when I remember when I was a kid, like I started watching TV, and as soon as I was old enough to know how to work the remote, I would switch to Turner Classic Movies. Mm-hmm. And I would just spend, I remember when I was a kid, I would spend an entire Saturday, and we're talking like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, just watching old movies. Mm-hmm. And I just escaped into them. They were my escape. I wrote a lot. I also read a lot of novels. I did all of the artsy things. At one point I even learned a little bit of the piano, most of which is gone now. I was never very good at it anyway. But I really created a whole universe for myself to kind of escape some of the negative things that were happening in my house. But then sometime around the time I was like, well, I don't want to get into my whole life story, but around the time when I was like 12, 13, I got it in my head, I can't just stay here. I can't stay in this trailer park. I can't stay with my mom and my dad. And I can't, if I stay here, I am going to die. Maybe physically, but certainly spiritually. If I stay in this place, I will die.
Those are some heavy feelings to have at that age.
Yeah.
Yes. There was a lot of heaviness. And
I totally relate.
And that kind of led me toward a more practical, almost like your dad, Hal, approach to life, where I ended up going to a tech school and I learned a trade because I was like, I don't know that I can afford to go to college. If I don't go to college, I'm not sure what's going to happen. So I need to learn a trade. So my first thing was I learned carpentry at my tech high school and got certified in it. I wasn't a great carpenter, but I was passable. And then I was smart enough. I got really good grades in school. I managed to get almost a full ride scholarship by cobbling together a bunch of scholarships. I was able to pay for college, basically, not on my own, obviously, but through all these other avenues. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to go to film school because, it
was a waste of money. I'm gonna throw it right out there.
Like I'm a researcher. Even at that age, I was researching, and I was like, the chances of me being successful and having a career in film at that point seemed so slim. It seemed like such a distant dream that I was like, where can I channel this energy, this curiosity, the talent that I have for writing and storytelling? And I settled on journalism. And I say settle. I didn't settle on it. I really love it. I've been blessed to have multiple passions in my life. And one of them is journalism. And so that's what I went to college for, because it seemed more practical than filmmaking. And for a long time, the artistic side of me kind of went fallow. My artistry was in journalism. I would apply all of that energy to telling the stories of other people. And then probably about, at this point, I guess it's been 5 or 6 years, after I moved to Harrisburg, after I got connected with the improv theater, after I met Hal, after I all these things started to fall in place. I also went to therapy.
Therapy!
Which
Yes,
helped
thank God,
a
therapy.
lot and unlocked a lot of stuff and helped me kind of reframe everything that had happened to me. And once I got my stuff together, I was like, you know what? I can try this. I have people in my corner. I was building relationships. And the very first film that I directed was with Hal and Hal's equipment in my apartment on 2nd Street.
Oh my God, I forgot about and this was, let's point out too, because Wallace is very humble about these things. This won Best Director at the Atlantic City Film Fest, right?
Yeah.
I forgot about that because that was we were supposed to shoot another movie that Wallace had written, and just like the director we had in mind dropped out, and that became a whole spiel later that we won't talk about. But Wallace was like, I have this short script. Why don't we just shoot this thing in my apartment? And it was very beautiful. Like it was very. There were a lot of feelings for what was essentially like a 2-page script. Was that it, or?
Yeah, there was not a lot of dialogue in it. It was a lot of imagery, and it was about grief.
Yeah,
it was about
a recurring theme in a lot of our movies.
Yeah, it was about someone leaving a relationship and also packing up and leaving their house, which I absolutely could relate to. And for me, creativity is really an expression of whatever I'm dealing with in the moment. It's an outlet.
Tell us too, what's the name of this movie so that we can find it on your Wallace Tube channel?
Well, believe it or not, I don't think I've ever made it public.
Oh, really?
No.
It's because it's on IMDb, because I was one of the things I was doing the last couple of days was creating an IMDb page for the collaborative film. And of course, you always have to go through and click on somebody to make sure you're adding the correct credits to the correct page and not creating 9 Shannon Fields every single time she's in a movie. And I was going through your page, and just to confirm I had the right Wallace, I saw in there, it's like Souls at Night is there, Return to Me. Not all of your movies are on IMDb, but Sun in an Empty Room, which is the name of the movie, was on there. And I'd kind of forgotten that we did that movie until just a few days ago. And I'm like, that was a great little movie. I had fun with that.
So my barometer is like the stuff I'm really proud of, or the stuff that ends up in a film festival. And I've been fortunate to get several things in film festivals.
Yeah.
I post those to IMDb. But anyway, I've fallen in love again with filmmaking in the last 5 years. And I don't make any money off of it, but it fills me with so much joy between the creativity of it, like just the process of creating a film, of getting these ideas on paper and telling a story. And as Roger Ebert says, like, movies are an empathy machine.
Yeah.
Like it's all about trying to make connections and put yourself in other people's skin, not literally.
Or literally.
There's 2 things that make me think about, like, have you ever seen, or I guess read, because it was a short story, the Stephen King movie Riding the Bullet, out of curiosity?
I have, yeah.
Riding the Bullet has my absolute favorite quote. Like, it's an above average-ish movie, but the main character is a painter, or wants to be, he's an art student, and the end of the movie has, like, his old self just painting on a porch, and it ends with, I never did make a living as a painter, but I still paint every day, and that was the point. And I think that's the most beautifully profound and succinct way to put that. It's like, never made a living as an artist, but I paint every day. Yeah. And also, if you've ever seen, what was it called? The Commitments. Commitments
I have not seen that.
It was a funky Irish-produced movie in the early 90s. Interesting enough, also stars in a supporting role Glenn Hansard, who became a star from Once, like 10 years before Once. And it's about a broke Irish guy with all of his friends, like living in the slums on unemployment, who's in love with soul music and decides that like there's a lot in common between the African American experience and the incredibly poor Irish experience. So he puts together an Irish soul band. Which goes nowhere and disappoints him. And the end of the movie is like he's storming off because his band is broken up. He didn't make it living off of it or any money. And the one like senior member of the band is like, "But you did well, son. Don't you see? You raised their expectations of life, and that was what was important." Mm-hmm. And that always makes me feel like very sad, like happy cry sad, like. The point wasn't making a living doing this. The point was getting people involved in something beyond themselves and raising their expectations of life. Because like all the people in the movie were beaten down in bad like relationships, bad careers, and it gave them an outlet to be creative. And I think that that's like whenever you say something like that, Wallace, it makes me think of those two things. Like what the real like going back to what we talked about an hour ago, what is the real purpose behind all this?
Yeah. And the hope is eventually the movies will, help support me in one way or another. But the more important thing is like I get to hopefully leave something for the planet, and like if one person can take something away from what I do, then it's worthwhile. And also the process itself, like working with this group of people where individually, like I love the auteur theory, but movies are not the work of one person.
I honestly like they shoved the auteur theory down our throats in film school, and the more I make movies, the more I think it's bullshit.
Yeah, there's a serendipity that happens when you have the right group of people together, and they feel comfortable and safe with each other. They can really do incredible things, and I just love that feeling of being on a film set, collaborating with people, and you can, as a director, if you can come into it with one idea, and then as soon as you work with actors, as soon as you get on set, there's a special magic that happens that is far away beyond even what you could imagine.
Yeah, I agree with that. So we have as nice as this conversation has been, we're about 5 minutes away from an hour and a half on this particular episode, which is probably the upper limit of what we should put on.
Sure.
Whatever a boy in his fridge puts on, that's our limit for. But
that's our benchmark for podcasts.
Cutting into what you were saying, Wallace, do you want to tell us about your segment for Never Too Late, which is the collaborative film that all of us have been working on for like 2.5 months that's finally going to be screening this Friday and this Saturday at 8 p.m. on Friday and 4:50 p.m. on Saturday.
Yeah, and it's a shame that Sam Melville, who is under the weather, could not be here to explain this herself.
We'll have her on some other time.
I understand this was in part her brainchild.
Yeah, so what it was I had a very similar idea like 5 years ago where I wanted it to be like an ABCs of Death or Monty Python sort of thing. And I pitched it to Sam Miller, and he said that he didn't think enough people would be interested in it. And then Sam Melville had this even more interest. Like her idea was way beyond what I had suggested, where it wasn't just you were interacting at the beginning, at the end, like passing off a torch. It was like she wanted fully interactive, like I think she only wanted, like the starting point was 2 connections per characters, but we interconnected in so many different ways for so many movies. Like the star of my movie, Ryan, is in all 5 movies in some capacity. And also Ben Chadwell, who had a small connecting role in my movie, was in yours, was in Sam Miller's, and connected with so many other movies too. Tell me about yours.
When you talk about serendipity, that right there is an example of serendipity, because I don't think Ben, not that I'm taking credit for this, but I asked Ben to be an extra in my section of the movie because I have a scene in a movie theater. It's very meta. And I know we had a conversation on my shoot where like Ben was like, "Oh, I kind of want to do some more stuff," and I knew that Sam Miller needed someone because one of his leads dropped out, and I was like, "Hey, Sam Miller needs someone."
So Ben started in your movie and then ended up in Sam Miller's movie.
He started with a tiny bit part in my movie where he has one close up and then he's in a couple crowd shots. And then he ended up in Sam Miller's movie. And then I don't know how he got in yours, but somewhere along the line, he got into yours too.
Because Sam and I were supposed, our two predetermined connections. Mine was with John Stoltzfus and then Sam Miller. And so that's where Ben came into play there. But talking about serendipity, Ben ended up being the star of Sam Miller's VidJam movie that screened last night as well. So he got the ins and now works with Sam.
So you threw me off there for a millisecond. Then I remembered the podcast comes out on Monday.
Full disclosure, we're recording this on a Friday, so it's like a time capsule.
Yeah.
But
I didn't question it. I was like, oh, you guys did a screening yesterday? Oh, I missed it.
But yeah, I have not so for the screening that happened yesterday and also for this collaborative project, as much as I'm working behind the scenes getting both of them going, I've tried my damnedest not to watch as much of the movies as I can. Like, basically, I just asked for the submitters for the most recent one, like what they wanted in the trailer, and then tried not to see anything else. So I want to be surprised as to like what's in the movies, but yours looks like it's very fun based on the things I've seen from the...
What do you mean, Hal? You've already seen it.
No, I'm talking from the collaborative project.
Shit, never mind.
Speaking of the one I've already seen, by the way, and I find this really amusing. Damn it, we're going to go over an hour and a half.
Damn it.
Hacktress, also from the bits and pieces I've seen, looks spectacular. And it's so funny that you and Josh have the exact opposite sensibilities with movies.
Well, and Josh said that like it's weird because like we kind of met a little bit in the middle. Like there's definite Wally-isms in this movie, but it's also a very trashy horror movie.
Wallyism is my new favorite term.
It sounded like the ink spots in the very beginning of that movie too, like because it felt like a Frank Darabont movie where all of his movies have had the ink spots all over the place, and they always sound super creepy in things because they always follow the same format for every like old timey sonograph song.
Yeah, well, that one's it's a riff on Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. For those of you who get that reference.
Yeah, well, I saw that like we talked about this on Memorial Day that he wanted to do a hagsploitation film, which I knew because I watched Feud on FX years ago about the making of Baby Jane. But if he hadn't told me that ahead of time and I was looking through that, I would have been like, this really has a Baby Jane vibe to it, or a Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte vibe to it.
All right, guys.
Oh, we need to wrap this up.
I have to pee so bad.
All right. Wait. I'm just going to close by saying to come to the collaborative project screening. It's going to be July 7th at 8 p.m. That's the screening I'll personally be at because I'm leaving for vacation the next day.
And I'll be there as well.
Yeah, and then Saturday at 4:50 p.m.
July 7th and July 8th.
Yeah. Do you have anything you want to say before you pee, Shannon?
No.
Shannon really wants to pee. And in other news, thanks for listening to Vacation Depression Podcast.
No puppies were pissed on in the making of this podcast.
No puppies pissing. I've been Hal.
I've been Shannon.
I'm Wallace.
And thank you all so much, and we'll see you next week.